Morning, my dear students. So I hope the project work, the two videos of the project work are absolutely clear to you and you are working on it. After 15th of October, I'm going to tell you to submit your projects in the school so that I can check them and give it back to you. And you can eradicate any mistake if you have in the project. Now today I'm going to start with part B of NCRT book or unit 12 of this RK Singla, and the name of the chapter is Consumer Protection. So see, my dear students, this is a very important chapter from board examination point of view, and almost 8 to 9 marks question comes from this individual chapter in the board examination. So we are going to go very slow with this chapter, and you have to cover each and every point, and you're going to cover line wise line this chapter so that nothing is left, because straight 8 to 9 marks question comes straight from this chapter alone. So consumer protection. So as the name is suggesting, what is a consumer? A person who consumes the goods. That's a consumer. Protection, it's like safeguarding the consumer. So in short, consumer protection means to safeguard the interests of the consumers, and so that they can be protected against the unfair practices of the producers and the sellers. So basically, consumer protection is nothing but safeguarding the interests of the consumers against the unfair practices of the producers and the sellers. So this is known as consumer protection. So I hope the meaning is clear to you. Consumer is a person who consumes the goods, and protection means safeguarding the interests of the consumers. So consumer protection means to safeguard the interests of the consumers against the unfair practices of the producers and the sellers. So you know very well that producers are there in the market to sell their products. Sometimes they use unfair practices to sell the products because they want their sales to be maximum. So it is very important to safeguard the consumers from the unfair practices which they do, which are conducted by the producers and the sellers. Now the question arises, what are the different unfair practices by the producers and the sellers? So now here is the list of the unfair practices by the producers and the sellers. So simply you will write the heading consumer protection, then you will write the meaning of consumer protection, and then we will come on to the unfair practices or malpractices by the producers and the sellers. So see, consumer protection, protection of consumer against the unfair trade practices of producers and sellers. And generally consumers are exploited by, means the unfair practices carried on by the producers and the sellers. These are the unfair practices. First is adulteration of consumer goods. So when there is mixing of in the goods, that is known as an unfair practice by the producer or the seller. Poor quality of goods and services, then misleading advertisements, short measure and underweight goods, creation of artificial scarcity by hoarding of goods. Now adulteration, you are absolutely clear, that means mixing in the consumer goods. Then next, poor quality of goods and services, when the producer or the seller is providing poor quality of goods and services, that is again a malpractice or an unfair trade practice by a producer and a seller. Then misleading advertisement, when the producer or the seller is giving an advertisement which is misleading the consumer. Short measures and underweight goods means when you are giving the, suppose on a packet it is written 250 grams. If you buy something and on that packet it is written 250 grams, but actually the weight of the product is just 200 grams, the quantity of the product is just 200 grams, that is again an unfair trade practice by the producer and the seller. Then last is creation of artificial scarcity by hoarding of goods. That means when you are actually creating an artificial scarcity, means this happens with the people who are dealing with petrol. Now generally when the petrol prices rises, these petrol pump owners, they come to know about the rise in the prices 1 or 2 days before. So they stop selling the product. So that means artificial scarcity. That is again an unfair trade practice by the petrol pump owners. So these are the unfair practices which should not be done by the producers and the sellers. So it is very important to safeguard the consumers from these unfair trade practices of producers and sellers. So when you're making your notes, first of all, you will write the meaning of consumer protection. That means to safeguard the interests of the consumers against the unfair practices of the producers and the sellers. Now then you will write the unfair practices or the malpractices by producers and sellers, and you will write these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 unfair practices by the producers and the sellers. Now we will move on to the examples of consumer exploitation in India. These are also important. These also you will write in your notebooks. On the basis of the judgment passed in courts and the reports published in the newspapers, following are the examples of consumer exploitation in India. How a consumer can be exploited by the producers and the sellers in India. These are the examples. A manufacturer of sunflower oil claims in the advertisement published in a national newspaper that his oil is rich in vitamins, minerals and proteins. On testing, all claims are found false. So this is an example of unfair trade practice, or you can say consumer exploitation in India. Many cloth manufacturers mark their product as polycotton. Here poly means polynosic and not polyester. The former material is very cheap as compared to the latter, and the consumers are not aware of it. So polycotton means polynosic, which is a very, you can say, cheap material. It is not polyester, but they cheat them by showing that it is polyester. Instant noodles can only be sold in the packing of 100 grams, but in case of some manufacturers, there are just 80-gram noodles in the packet. This is a case of short measures and underweight goods. A woman got admitted in a civil hospital for an appendix operation, but the doctor treated her negligently and removed her gallbladder instead of the appendix, and as a result, the woman died. So this is a case of poor quality of goods and services. So these are some of the examples of consumer exploitation in India. I hope this topic is absolutely clear to you. That means meaning of consumer protection. What are the different unfair trade practices which are carried out by the producers and sellers, and examples of consumer exploitation in India. Now we will move on to the importance of consumer protection. Now what is the importance of consumer protection from the consumer's point of view and from the business point of view? This is a very important topic from board examination point of view. Generally, one question definitely comes in the board examination from these two topics. Sometimes the question comes like this way: what is the importance of consumer protection from the consumer point of view? What is the importance of consumer protection from the business point of view? So this question comes in 3 marks generally. So make sure that you do this question very, very properly. So from the consumer point of view, the importance is consumers' ignorance. Generally, the consumers are not aware of their rights. It is only because of the ignorance, because they are ignorant, that they cannot raise their voice against their exploitation rampant in the market. They bear this exploitation without any grudge, thinking that it is a part of the market. Hence, they remain inactive in this respect. Therefore, it has become necessary in public interest that they should be educated about their rights so that they become activated. So from the consumer point of view, the importance of consumer protection is that consumer ignorance should be removed. Consumer ignorance is removed because of consumer protection. Then unorganized consumers are unorganized, and this fact alone highlights the importance of consumer protection. A single consumer raising his voice against exploitation is not effective as the voice of an organized both consumers' body can be. So in an organized manner, a voice can be raised, and therefore consumer protection is very important. There are different laws, there are different acts which are formed to protect the consumer. This way the consumers become organized. Then third is widespread exploitation of consumers, as I've already discussed. These are the 5 points by which the consumers can be exploited. Adulteration in consumer products, inferior quality of goods and services, misleading advertisement, less weighing and less measuring, and creating artificial scarcity of goods. So consumer protection is absolutely necessary in order to get rid of such exploitation. So from consumer point of view, consumer ignorance is removed. Then unorganized consumers are removed. And then the widespread exploitation of consumer is removed because of consumer protection, right? Now, from the business point of view, consumer protection is important for long-term interest of business. See, it's a very common factor that if you are a businessman, if you are a seller, and if you sell wrong products, then the consumer will come to you just once. But if you want that your business should run for a long period of time, then of course it is important that you should not you should not follow any unfair trade practice. So for long-term interest of business, consumer protection is very important. Business uses society's resources. Now every business uses the resources of the society, whether it is material, machinery, human capital, etc. All these resources are supplied by society. From this point of view, it becomes the responsibility of the business to provide better facilities to society. By doing this and through the medium of consumer protection, business gets an opportunity to discharge its responsibility towards the society. Then next is social responsibility. It is the social responsibility of the business to protect the interests of the owner and all other related constituents like employees, consumers, suppliers, competitors, government. So consumers happen to be the most important of all the related constituents. Therefore, more importance and attention should be given in the protection of their interests. Then moral justification. It is the responsibility of the business. It is the moral responsibility of the business to take care of the interests of the consumers. So we should not indulge ourselves in misleading advertisement, hoarding of goods, profiteering, black marketing, less weighing and measuring. So by doing this, they can discharge their moral responsibility, and it can be said that business is helping the cause of consumer protection. Then government intervention. By ignoring consumers' interests, business is inviting the government intervention. Government intervention, as I've already explained you earlier, means government interference. So if you are indulging in all the unfair trade practices, you are automatically inviting government intervention. To avoid the government intervention, it is very important not to follow the unfair trade practices in the business. So this is the importance of consumer protection from business point of view. So this is a very important topic, importance of consumer protection from the consumer point of view and from the business point of view. I hope this topic is absolutely clear to you. We are going to stop here today. And so today we have covered what is the meaning of consumer protection, what are the different unfair trade practices followed by the producers and the consumers. Then some examples of exploitation in India, which is a very simple topic. Then importance of consumer protection from the consumer point of view and from the business point of view. So please make your notes clearly. This chapter is very, very important from the board examination point of view. almost 7, 8 to 9 marks question comes from this chapter. So make sure that you do this chapter very, very thoroughly. Thank you and have a nice day ahead.